Call of Duty has been the biggest franchise in gaming for almost 15 years. It will not die. Today, I'll be covering the reason why, and it's not what you expect. There are over 20 Call of Duty games. They've come out every single year since '05. You could set your watch to COD releases. Well, if you were a boomer who still had to set his watch. The series has gone from World War II to Modern Warfare to fighting zombies and to the future, and then back to the past again, and then back to Modern Warfare again. And I'm not talking about Modern Warfare 2. I was talking about Modern Warfare again, which was the third time they came out with a game called Modern Warfare, and technically would be Modern Warfare 4. Anyway, there's a lot of CODs. Just about every gamer has played a Call of Duty game. If we're going to track down why it's been so dominant for so long, we have to go back to the beginning. Call of Duty 1 was a good game. It's also kind of irrelevant to the video. Here's what you need to know. There are 3 Call of Duty games. Call of Duty 2 was really good, and the other 2 were just like regular good. They were popular games, but they weren't the biggest game in the world. We don't get to the world-changing Call of Duties until Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. The game came out in '07, and most of the things we find in modern traditional shooters can be traced back to Call of Duty 4. It was the first major shooter to have customizable classes. It was the first to have a leveling up to unlock new weapons and attachments. It was the first to have sprinting. Yeah, sprinting came from Call of Duty 4. So many games before you just had to walk at normal pace. The game was also the first AAA shooter to be set in the modern... Okay, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get away with saying modern all the time. There are 6 different Call of Duty games that have modern in the title. But, okay, so Call of Duty 4 finally got out of World War II, and instead of fighting Nazis, now you're fighting Russians, and you're dealing with terrorists and nukes, and you also got new weapons like the Bear 50 cal. The guys who made Call of Duty 4 really knew what they were doing. Like, they went on to make Titanfall and Apex. Honestly, they're some of the most underrated people in the games industry, but we don't have time for that. There's a dozen more Call of Duties we have to go through in some capacity here. So, the reason why Call of Duty hasn't died is because of Call of Duty 4. It created the formula for the modern shooter, and they have perfected it from there. But that's not a very good reason for the series to not have died. What, you're telling me 14 years ago they innovated, and people still just want to play that now? The newer games have moved away from a lot of the things they did in Call of Duty 4, and so has the rest of the industry. There's also been so much borrowed and copied by other shooters that the things that Call of Duty 4 did aren't really selling points anymore, they're just expected. There's also a lot of other games that were huge in '07 that haven't survived until now. Halo 3 came out that year, it was a huge deal, and now look at Halo. That year, the first BioShock came out, and that series is already done. Team Fortress 2 came out then. And, wait, I think people still play Team Fortress 2. We might have to come back to that one. Okay, back to the drawing board. We're going to get to the bottom of why Call of Duty hasn't died yet, but we also need to get to the bottom of why most of you guys don't subscribe to the videos. I can't figure it out. Press the subscribe button. If you're liking the video, press it. Let's get back into it. Before COD 4 came out, there was the search for a Halo killer. Halo was such a big series that people were looking for something that could outdo Halo. Well, COD 4 beat Halo, and they showed that they could do it again with Modern Warfare 2. At this point, they dropped the whole direct numbering thing, which is probably a good thing because Modern Warfare 3 is a better title than Call of Duty 20. Call of Duty, I'm sorry, man, it's getting hard to say that name every time. Call of Duty outsold itself year after year. We got Modern Warfare 2, and then Black Ops, and then Modern Warfare 3, and Black Ops 2. We're seeing a trend repeating. Every single one of these games dominated the charts and improved the Call of Duty formula a little bit. Well, they refined the formula a little more. Some of these games were better received than others, but all of them sold well. At the time, if you needed a game to play with the boys, everyone likely had at least one Call of Duty game in common. It joined the list of standard video game with like Madden and stuff like that. And I guess FIFA if you're from Europe. Call of Duty was a simple game. Just run around and shoot. You had leveling and kill streaks and custom layouts, but the core game stayed simple and smooth. I said the core game remained simple and smooth. Anyway, so the real reason Call of Duty hasn't died yet is because it's the Everyman Shooter. It's the one that everyone can play, that everyone has played. It's casual enough to not be intimidating. The campaign is easy enough that you can probably beat it with one hand tied behind your back, which is good because, you know, people with one arm want a game too. It also does a good job of being challenging enough that it doesn't feel like the game is playing itself. The multiplayer also lets people of all skill levels play. Not everybody likes that. Some people just want to beat up on scrubs. But let the scrubs have some fun too, man. And in more recent games, they've added Warzone, the Battle Royale version, which is just an extension of this. Battle Royales do a good job of giving more people a chance to play and enjoy shooters. It's not the same non-stop action as the multiplayer. People get to wander around, collect strong weapons so they can have some kind of an advantage, and they get to hide out. But that's not the reason why Call of Duty hasn't died. There's a few problems with the argument. First, the game wasn't always so accessible. That came after the initial success. After it became the king of shooters, they came up with a lot of complicated ways to make the game simple. There didn't used to be matchmaking where they would put you against people of your same skill level. Instead of putting scrubs against scrubs and not scrubs against not scrubs, they would just dump everybody into the same pool. It was chaos. Even these days, it's very accessible, but it should have had some more problems with that when games like Fortnite started to come out. Fortnite also grabs the everyman audience. It has very casual, very fun game modes, and it's free. And most other shooters are a lot more accessible now too. So we have to keep looking for the reason why it didn't die. Let's go back to the history. I think we left off around Black Ops 2. At this point, Call of Duty had been on top of the world for a while. Sure, other shooters had evolved around it. Battlefield 3 had revived that franchise, and wouldn't you know it, it did it by borrowing a lot of things from Call of Duty. Again, like sprinting. That didn't stop Call of Duty from doing numbers though. They released Call of Duty Ghosts, which had the worst scores of any Call of Duty game up to that point. I know that all these games are kind of blurring together and it's looking like they're all just a copy-paste of one another, but Ghosts was the most copy-paste of any Call of Duty game. When they announced the game, the big new feature they announced was that there was going to be a dog in the campaign, and that he looked pretty cool.
Please clap.
I'm serious. And this game still destroyed in sales. People still bought it and played it because it was the new Call of Duty game. What you gonna do? The marketing machine worked, and the momentum of the franchise worked in their favor. So, Call of Duty hasn't died because of the tremendous momentum it has, and because Activision pours a stupid amount of money into marketing. Thanks for watching. Just kidding. It's not that one. Can't be that one. Tons of other game series have had momentum and marketing going for them, and they stumbled and died out.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer.
Even with Activision themselves, they've had other franchises that had tons of marketing and heavy push, and they still declined and outright died. Shout out to Tony Hawk. Shout out to World of Warcraft, which is, I guess, still around. Shout out to Skylanders. In general, just marketing doesn't work. Now, it's not gaming, but let's look at Marvel movies. They were in a very similar situation to Call of Duty. They had a stupid amount of marketing. They used to have the most momentum of any movie franchise. Now, they're a flop factory. I'm personally still looking for proof that a single breathing human watched the Marvels. Now, unfortunately, I can't prove that someone saw the Immortals, which, yeah. Back to COD. We've even seen the series slump. After Ghosts, they released 5 games in a row that couldn't even pass Ghosts in sales. And there were some real stinkers in there. They even saw that EA had brought Battlefield back to World War I and decided, hey, it's been over 5 years. Maybe people aren't tired of World War II anymore. Oh, they're still pretty tired of World War II, aren't they? Okay, let's go back to where they started doing things right and work back from there. COD 4 had a legendary campaign, so it has to be... No, it's not the campaign either. The games have done well with good campaigns and with bad campaigns, and they've even done well with no campaign at all. Okay, wait, so maybe not the campaign itself, but the level design. The levels in the campaigns have been really well designed. Yes, they're very linear. You walk and you shoot. That's the campaign. Among walk and shoot shooters, they're some of the best. Some of the COD 4 levels really still hold up, even though they came out like 15 years ago. And the map design for multiplayer, woo! There have been so many good maps in the past. Terminal, and Nuketown, and Hijacked, and Raid. Summit, that's my map right there, and Slums. These maps are so good and so iconic that Call of Duty won't die. No, it's not the map design or the level design either, even though both of those things are pretty good and part of what makes Call of Duty what it is. The games have just not been consistent with coming out with good maps. There are COD games with basically no good maps, and once again, there are COD games with no campaign or poor campaign. Other shooters have had plenty of iconic maps. Halo is a great example. Halo had tons of amazing and loved maps, and the campaigns were on another level. And that series is crashing and burning right now. The most beloved maps in COD history came out a long time ago. Shocker, people like what they know. It's not the maps. So we've covered a ton of things that make Call of Duty, but that haven't kept it from dying. It's not innovation, it's not that the Call of Duty formula is perfect, it's not the maps, it's not that Call of Duty is the most accessible shooter. So what is it? Why won't these games die? Don't worry, I've got you. The real reason Call of Duty hasn't died is because of the frame rate. No, stop. Don't type that comment in. Hear me out. Let me cook, okay? what do we mean when we talk about frame rate? We'll just go over that for the uninitiated. Frame rate is the number of frames a game displays in a second. We talk about it in FPS or frames per second. I know it's confusing. There's FPS and FPS, but I can't help it. Whatever. Let's just go into an example. If a game ran at 1 FPS, that would be a single frame every second. It's like a slideshow. If we go back to 2007, in the era of Call of Duty 4, back when Call of Duty began its reign as the #1 shooter, most games ran at a maximum of 30 FPS on console. Call of Duty 4 ran at 60. So let's look at an example of 30 FPS versus 60 FPS.
This won't be my first kill, you understand?
Well, what does that have to do with Call of Duty not dying? I'm getting to it, okay? I'm getting to it. Frame rate does play into how a game looks. More importantly, though, it changes how a game feels. Higher FPS makes a game feel smoother and faster. If the FPS is low, you may or may not be able to see it. It kind of just depends on how familiar you are with this stuff. You will definitely be able to feel it, though, even if your conscious mind can't identify it. As frame rates climb, you get diminishing returns, so you can still feel the difference between 60 FPS and 120 FPS, but not necessarily between 200 and 300. But this also means on the lower end, the increases matter way more. Going from 30 frames per second to 60 frames per second is a night and day difference. Linus Tech Tips did a really good video on this where he was comparing people playing the same game at different frame rates. They measured all the way from pro players to just straight up casuals. Even when you were looking at increases on the higher end, they saw a huge gain on both measurable things like reaction times, but also on the intangibles like how the game felt to play. Call of Duty was the only console shooter to prioritize 60 FPS for every single game. Every single game from Call of Duty 4 all the way up to Call of Duty 20 all run at a minimum of 60 frames per second. Even as late as 2018, Battlefield games did not run at 60 FPS on consoles. Not consistently. The frame rate itself has been a major factor. It's probably the secret killer feature for Call of Duty in the mid-2010s. But it also shows the things that they prioritize in a Call of Duty game. A lot of these games have mediocre graphics compared to other games that came out at the same time. They decided to keep the graphics lower to preserve the smooth gameplay. So much of Call of Duty's feel throughout the year can be traced back to this. You can think of these games as arcadey run and gun shooters, and a lot of them had mechanics that led you to play that way. But the smooth, consistent feeling of playing a Call of Duty game set it apart from all other console shooters. These days, games are catching up in terms of frame rate, but they've just been relying on better hardware showing up in new consoles and PCs. And Call of Duty is continuing to push forward on this, going to higher FPS as the hardware progresses. As long as Call of Duty can provide its players with a consistent, smooth, high FPS gaming experience, it will never die. Have a good one.